Ladies and gentlemen, just before His Worship the Mayor starts the meeting formally, I just need to make those usual announcements that we make when we have some people attending remotely. I know we can only see Councillor Gibbs at the moment. I think we will have Councillor Darren Roberts at some point attending remotely. So just to remind you, the usual protocols about please remain muted at all times unless you wish to speak. And then when you are asked to speak, unmute yourself and then return yourself to mute once you've finished. If you have a question, if you could raise your hand, then we will call you in order as much as we can. Obviously, we are trying to monitor who's in the chamber as well as who is remote, but we'll do our best to get to you in the order that you indicated to speak. And please do not speak until you've been invited to do so. If you have any questions, only ask at question time, and if you have comments, only ask when comments have been required. If you have to leave the meeting for any reason, can you please indicate that so that we can make a record of it? And as you are aware, you cannot vote on any item if you haven't heard the whole of the debate. When we come to the recommendations, I will be inviting everybody to vote, or at least the Mayor will be inviting everybody to vote, and then I'll read out the names of those who are attending remotely so that you can just indicate your vote at that point. So I think that's all, Mr. Mayor, and I'll hand the meeting over to you to commence.
Croeso I cyfarfod, diolch I chi gyd am dod. Good afternoon, welcome to today's full council meeting of Wednesday, 8th of February 2023. Agenda item number 1, apologies for absence. Democratic Services, have we had any apologies? Thank you very much. Councillor Clive Jones.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Scott Thomas is on his way. He did indicate that he'd be a little late. And Councillor Darren Roberts, I can only presume that he's been delayed by traffic. So if for some reason there's been an accident, I give his apologies in advance. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Anybody else indicating? Okay. Agenda item number 2, declarations of interest. Members are reminded of their personal responsibility to declare any personal or prejudicial interest in respect of matters contained in this agenda in accordance with the provisions of the Local Government and Finance Act 1992 relating to Council Tax, the Local Government Act 2000 and the Council's Constitution and the Members' Code of Conduct. Are there any members who wish to make a declaration of interest for any of the agenda items being discussed today? Nobody indicating. Thank you very much. Agenda item number 3, to approve as accurate the minutes of previous meetings, which covers reports 3A to 3L, which are full council meetings of 11th of January, 19th of January and 1st of February 2023, Cabinet of 11th of January 2023, Planning, Regulatory and Licensing 18th of January 2023, Governance and Audit Committee of 16th of January 2023, Combined Governance and Audit Committee, Joint Scrutiny Committee of 17th of January 2023, Social Services Scrutiny Meetings of 29th of November 2022 and 10th of January 2023, Neighbourhood Services, Countryside and Planning of 19th of December 2023, and a Standards Committee of 9th of December 2022. I believe the Council Leader Geraint Thomas will be moving this report.
Move the report, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. Do we have a seconder for this agenda item?
Happy to second, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Andrew Barry. Any members got anything to raise in relation to the minutes? No, nobody indicating. Members, can we put this to the vote then, please?
And Mr. Mayor, while that's just taking place, can I ask Councillor Gibbs, could you please indicate for, against or abstaining?
For.
Thank you. And that's carried, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. Agenda item number 4, whistleblowing policy 2023, To consider the report of the Chief Executive, the Cabinet Member for Governance and Resources, Councillor Andrew Barry, will be presenting and moving this report.
Thanks, Mayor. Whistleblowing Policy 2023. The Council originally approved the current whistleblowing policy in 2015 and has been part of our Council's constitution ever since. The new policy at Annex 1 with its 2 appendices, excuse me, is an amalgamation of a new Pan-Wales model code produced by the Welsh Local Government Association to standardise the policy and give more consistency to the approach of whistleblowing. Section 3 gives the rationale, excuse me, rationale and legislative background, where Section 4 points out that it has been highlighted that a review system needs to be implemented as the current policy has not been reviewed over the last 8 years. The new policy has a review arrangement every 2 years, satisfying Audit Wales requirement. Other additions include anonymous reporting, Council's fraud line has been added, the National Audit Office detail is in there, and the Charity Protect contact details, and a confidential reporting form to aid employees in any reporting. Full Council back on the 11th of January. 4 councils ago, we were asked to approve a new constitution, which we chose to defer. This is a constituent element of that constitution and sits alongside the anti-fraud, bribery and corruption policy. These detailed elements that sit within the constitution give us the detail I think we were all looking for from the Constitution before approving it. Mr. Mayor, taking detailed reports in bite-sized chunks gives clarity to the makeup of the Constitution and a clearer understanding to members when having to digest such complex issues. This report and the Cabinet Member for Public Protection, Councillor Michelle Simmons' report later in relation to the scheme of delegation, another report that sits within the Constitution, indicates to me that we as a chamber made the correct decision in deferring such a mammoth report on the Constitution until the detail became more clear to members, and it hopefully has with this series of reports we are now seeing. I'll take you to the recommendation, Mr. Mayor. 2.1, the new whistleblowing code annexed at Annex 1 be approved, and 2.2, the Council's constitution be updated to reflect the recommendation of 2.1 be approved. I move the report, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Barry. Do we have a seconder for this agenda item?
Second that, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. Do we have any questions from members? Councillor Clive Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've got 2 questions. The first one's on Annex 1 on page 58, and it's headed aims and scope of the code. And I'll read the last sentence of paragraph B, top of page 58. Confidential reporting code is intended to cover major concerns that fall outside the scope of other procedures, and then there's a list of what that entails. If you go down to Roman numeral IX, it says other unethical conduct. Could the Deputy Monitor Officer give us an example of unethical conduct, please?
It's something that I haven't considered. I think it's something you have to look at on a case-by-case basis. I think the reason it's vague is as many things could fall within that. It's not specified. I think it'd be up to the person considering any whistleblowing to determine what is or what isn't, Councillor.
So shouldn't we give perhaps some sort of guide for someone who's reading this document? Because I would have thought it's pretty wide and open.
It's taken from the Act, and I think that section is exactly the same as is in our current constitution. I'm just scrolling through it. We have a section in the current constitution, whistleblowing policy, for aims and scope of the policy. I'm looking through it. It mentions improper conduct in the previous constitution, but as I said, that's taken the new whistleblowing policy is taken from I forget the word I'm trying to use, a model that was produced by Welsh Government. It's not something that we've particularly put in there. I think it goes back to the Act, but there's no definition of that as far as I'm aware.
Okay, thank you. And
Councillor
the,
Jones, I think the Chief Executive.
oh, sorry.
Sorry, I will defer to the monitoring officer in a minute, but I just did a quick look up in terms of so definition in the law inside behaviour. So of unethical conduct is behaviour that falls below or violates professional standards that may include violations of board policies or regulations and or other standards of conduct. So just as an example, I think that's where it would be the catch-all Simon potentially is referring to. I can't help further than that, but so it may put some context to it.
And just what I was going to add is that I think it's very specifically non-specific. What the purpose of a whistleblowing policy is that if anybody is worried about any activity, it gives them an opportunity to report it. So the more you define it, the more you limit the opportunity to report. So I think that's why it is deliberately meant to be general, so that people can, if they feel that it's something inappropriate that's happening, they can report it. And then if there's then a conclusion that it doesn't need to be reported, then they can be told that. The idea is report it and be told, rather than don't report it because you think it doesn't fall within some category or other.
I'm glad I asked the question, Mr. Mayor. The second question is on page 75, and is it appendix to 5.04.02, and it's under the heading initial steps. I just read this quickly, the paragraph. For each notified suspicion, the director of the area concerned or the chief executive will appoint an investigating officer to be in charge of the investigation on a day-to-day basis. The head teacher and the governing body will make this decision in the case of a school after receiving advice from appropriate officers of the authority. The investigating officer, I presume, could be someone internal, but could well be, and may well be better for it to be an external investigating officer.
Well, it can be. That's the point of it being phrased in the way that it is. But correct me if I'm wrong, is that not the policy that we are abandoning, and we're moving into Appendix 1? So that's the old policy. That's not the policy we're asking you to look at. Appendix 1 is the new policy. That's just there so that you can see the differences.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Councillor Kevin Gibbs.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have two questions. I think it's more for clarification than anything. On page 59, towards the bottom of the page, 23.6, untrue allegations. It goes on to say, if you make an allegation in good faith, but it is not confirmed by the investigation, no action will be taken against you. However, you make an allegation frivolously, maliciously, or for personal gain, disciplinary action may be taken against you. Now, I just want clarification on this one, please, Simon. One, for how an allegation can be made frivolously in this context, plus also the other concern I have, and I appreciate this is already in the existing report, with Merthyr being such a small council and everybody knowing everybody else, how can we be sure that whoever decides it's a frivolous investigation is working in merit and in respect of that?
a good question. I think again, I'd have to say each case on its own merits. It's very hard to prejudge what would be something that would be classed as frivolous. It would be, I suppose, on the sort of judgment of the investigating officer. Not come across anything like this in reality and in practice. So not much more I can add to that, I'm afraid, Councillor.
Yeah, I was thinking more, Simon, from the point of if there was ongoing animosity between the investigating officer and the member of staff who's actually made the complainant, is there then, does that investigating officer who's decided to go down the disciplinary route, is there not so much recourse? Is it looked by a second pair of eyes to make sure that is the right decision to discipline that member of staff?
Well, I think you mentioned about animosity between the investigating officer and the person who made the complaint. That investigating officer shouldn't be the investigating officer in the first instance, if that was the case. Somebody would have to be appointed who has no connection with the person who's making the complaint.
How would we be able to monitor that and police it?
I think probably that's for me to answer, because the overall responsibility for this lies with me. First of all, the whistleblower is the person who decides to whom they make their complaint. So it overtly makes the provision that if you have a concern about your manager or somebody who might be making decisions, you don't complain to them. That's why you have the opportunity to complain either to me or to the chief exec or to the leader of the council. So there are various avenues that people can go down in order to make their complaint. There has to be a provision that allows us to weed out, if I can put it that way, people who may be making malicious and deliberately untrue allegations, because it's inappropriate that we allow that to happen. But equally, if there were to be any decision that somebody had made a frivolous or an inappropriate complaint, and it was decided that there should be a disciplinary procedure, then that would go through all the usual disciplinary procedures. So that would mean there would be other eyes on it. It's not just one person who would make that decision. That would then go through the proper council processes to make sure that there was no recrimination against somebody who had made a complaint, unless it was proven to be a frivolous or inappropriate complaint. Does that answer the question?
It does, lovely. It clarifies that point. Thank you very much, Caris. My second question is on page 62, right down the bottom of the page, under paragraph B. It says, if you do take the matter outside the council, you should ensure that you do not disclose confidential information, and to check with the contact point about that. My question regarding this one is, if we are making a complaint, if somebody is making a complaint to, say, the police or investigating authority, surely they should need the full information, and potentially there could be confidential information in there for the investigation to be carried out properly.
Yes, obviously that's going to be the case, but that's why it makes provision that you should check with the contact point about it. So if you are disclosing information that you have felt the need to take outside of your organisation, it's highly likely that some of it would be confidential, but the purpose of that is to ensure that you have due regard to the fact that you can't just go outside and disclose confidential information. You would need to approach some sort of figure, as you say, the police or somebody similar, and then discuss with them as to how you're going to disclose that information, because there has to be some way of preserving the confidentiality of the local authority, but also this policy allows you to disclose externally. So it's there to ensure that the confidentiality is maintained, but not to prevent you disclosing to an external body.
Fabulous. That's the answer I'm looking for. Thank you, Caris. And just for a point of clarity, then, it says check with the contact point. So who would necessarily be the contact point?
That would be the person that you're making the complaint to, so that you can then almost come to an agreement with them as to how it is that you're going to share information and what information they're going to share back. You would, I would hope, be liaising with somebody who is in some sort of official capacity, and then we would be able to form that professional relationship and agree how information is shared.
Sure. Okay, lovely. Thank you, Carys. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's me done.
Thank you, Councillor Gibbs. Any other members with questions? Councillor Clive Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's just a general question. How often should this whistleblowing policy be reviewed? Because different things happen at different times. So how often should we be reviewing this?
Going to be reviewed every 2 years.
Right.
That's
So
the
it-
recommendation of the regulators. That's one of the
Right.
reasons why it's had to come
So
now, because the regulators are waiting for us
Yeah,
to put in a
yeah.
provision for review.
so it'll happen every 2 years
Yes.
from there on. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Jones. Any other members with questions? Nobody's indicating. Any members with comments? Councillor Clive Jones.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I agree with Councillor Andrew Barry that it's the right thing to have done to have this policy coming before us so that we can have members to have read it and to ask pertinent questions. If this had been embodied in the up-to-date constitution, you know, some of the questions may well have been missed.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Any other members with comments? No. Nobody's indicating. Okay, members, can we take this to the vote then, please? And while we're doing it, we'll go to those online.
Yes. So I know Councillor Darren Roberts has joined us, but I know that he did join us before we had begun the debate. And so I'll ask firstly, Councillor Kevin Gibbs, can you let us know whether you are voting for, against or abstaining, please?
For Carys.
Thank you. Councillor Darren Roberts, the same question to you. Can you let us know whether you are voting for, against or abstaining, please?
For.
Thank you. And then, Mr. Mayor, that's carried.
Thank you, Monitoring Officer. Agenda item number 5, Treasury Management Outturn Report 2021-2022 to consider the report of the Chief Executive. The Cabinet Member for Governance and Resources, Councillor Andrew Barry, will be presenting and moving this report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Treasury Management Outturn Report 21-22. Members will recognise the report. The report talks to the management of cash flows, banking, money market monitoring, and the capital market transactions that have taken place through the financial year 2021-22. In essence, the financial management of this authority. Our Treasury management consultants in this pursuit are Arling Close, and they assist the accountancy team in making adjustments to our financial dealings on a daily basis. The report itself is at Appendix A and is in compliance with the Chartered Institute of Public Finance. Council approved our Treasury Management Strategy on the 3rd of March 2021. Members could not have failed to have noticed the volatility of the economy throughout 2021-22, outlined in Appendix 1. As a result, there have been significant revisions of the guidance and codes received by the authority throughout the period. Table 1 on page 89 of your papers outlines the amounts we're talking about in terms of transactions, with Table 2 on the following page giving members details of how that borrowing breaks down in relation to our short and long-term borrowing requirements throughout that year. A breakdown of where the money came from is at Table 3 on the same page. This is a very comprehensive financial assessment of our performance throughout the year. I'll bring members' attention to the table at 11.2 on page 94 that describes the indicator to control the authority's exposure to interest rate risk, which we obviously complied with. And now, off the back of 10 consecutive Bank of England interest rate rises, becomes even more relevant. And I'll speak more about that in relation to the half-year review report. In summary, a tremendously prudent year for the authority that contributed in no small part to the outturn position as detailed in a statement of accounts approved at full council last month. The recommendations, Mr Mayor, are 2.1, 2.2, 2.1 being the Treasury Management Outturn Report for 21-22 be received, and 2.2, the actual 2021-22 Treasury Indicators be received. I'll move the report, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Barry. Do we have a seconder for this agenda item?
Second the report, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. Any questions from members? Nobody's indicating. Any comments from members? Nobody's indicating. So can we take this to the vote then, please?
And again, while that's the vote is being counted in the chamber, can I ask Councillor Kevin Gibbs, can you please tell us whether you're voting for, against or abstaining?
For.
Thank you. And Councillor Darren Roberts, please can you indicate whether you are voting for, against or abstaining?
For, monitoring officer.
Thank you. And that's carried, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Monitoring Officer. Agenda item number 6, Treasury Management Half-Year Review Report 2022-2023. To consider the report of the Chief Executive. Again, the Cabinet Member for Governance and Resources, Councillor Andrew Barry, will be presenting and moving this report.
Thanks, Mayor. Treasury Management Half-Year Review Report 22-23. Similar report to the previous report covering a period of 2022-23 financial year, and this report takes us to, I think, October 22. Again, in Appendix 1 of this report, members will see the economic summary for the first 6 months of this financial year, which makes bleak reading, say the least, and has us in the potentially catastrophic position, to use John Ray's terminology, the Financial Director of WLGA, when describing all Welsh authorities' predicament at present. Again, same format of the report, describing Table 1, this time on page 103 of your papers, outlining the amounts that we're talking about in terms of transactions. Table 2 on the same page, giving members detail of how that borrowing breaks down in relation to our short and long-term borrowing requirement throughout this year. The breakdown of where the money came from is at Table 3 on the next page. Mr Mayor, you'll see at section 11 of the report on page 108 a far more comprehensive analysis by necessity of the timeline of interest rate risk mentioned in the previous report. From what members have seen in the media, experienced in their own and residents' lives, and by reading the turmoil described at Appendix 1, the economic summary section, you'll understand the pressures our accountancy teams have been under just to keep pace with the volatility of the financial markets. Mr Mayor, if I can give an example of that day to day before going to the recommendations. Because of the risks, the risk exposure to interest rate volatility, we fixed £60 million worth of debt with the Public Works Loans Board. 30 million was fixed in September, 3 tranches of 10 million, each with interest rates of 3.93, 3.96 and 4.01, maturing in 8 years, 9 years and 10 years, respectively. Within a week of those transactions, the Public Works Loans Board borrowing had become more expensive, with interest rates increasing to circa 4.7%. Within another week, the interest rates had increased further to circa 5.1 and then to 5.4%. By carrying out these transactions, when we did, we avoided increased interest rate costs of 210,000 at 4.7%, 330,000 at 5.1%, and 416,000 should we have left it to 5.4%. A further 30 million was fixed in November for 1 year only at a interest rate of 3.89. We took these transactions after engaging with our treasury management consultants, Arling Close. Although markets have calmed in recent months and inflationary pressures are due to fall, there are still potential increases in the interest rates that are likely. The transactions we undertook last autumn have proved hugely beneficial for this authority, which our staff are to be acknowledged and congratulated for their actions. Steve, you, Adele, the staff, Arling Close consultants, this independent group's thanks we give you for the vigilance and swift action in the prudent manner in which they've handled and continue to handle public funds for the residents of this county borough. Just a practical example, Mr. Mayor, of what goes on behind the scenes that members will hardly be aware of, and the public certainly won't. I'll take you to the recommendations. 2.1, the Treasury Management half-year review report 2022-23 be received. Is it just the one? Yeah, and that's it. I move the report, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Barry. Do we have a seconder for this agenda item?
Happy to second that, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. Can we go to questions from members? Nobody's indicating. Any comments from members? Councillor Clive Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do support what Councillor Andrew Barry just said in relation to the staff involved. We're in, without a shadow of doubt, unprecedented times. And with the market as volatile as it is, we didn't have staff as alert as it had been. Certainly that would have affected the financial situation, not only now, but in the years ahead. And I too want to reiterate on behalf of the Labour Group opposition, the work that they've been undertaking during these months.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Councillor Geraint Thomas.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to agree with Councillor Barry and Councillor Jones. I made an analogy this week in a meeting. I think it might have been, yeah, it was Monday, I believe, or it could have been Friday now. We're talking about the budget so much going forward. One day rolls into another and week into week at the moment in time. And I described Steve Jones as Barry John. And he's got the very safe hands. And I think he says to Councillor Barry on times, you throw it, I'll catch it. And he doesn't drop the ball. So thank you, Adele, and thank you, Steve, for all the work you did. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. Any other comments from members? Okay, nobody's indicating. Can we take this to the vote then, please?
Can I ask Councillor Gibbs, please, are you voting for, against or abstaining?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Darren Roberts, are you voting for, against or abstaining?
For.
Thank you. And that's carried, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Monitoring Officer. Agenda item number 7, Public Protection Scheme of Delegation. To consider the report of the Deputy Chief Executive, the Cabinet Member for Public Protection, Crime and Disorder, Councillor Michelle Simmons, will be presenting and moving this report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Public Protection Scheme of Delegation report authors Paul Lewis and Simon Jones. The summary of the report is outlined in 1.1 to 1.3. 1.1, a full review has been conducted into legislation enforced by the Public Protection Services in line with the current review of the authority's constitution, considering departmental restructures, changes to job titles and changes to legislation. 1.2, the identified legislation attached as Annex 1 and Annex 2 concern public protection statutory duties and are a list of adopted legislation required for the operation of an effective public protection service. A scheme of delegation is required to authorise officers to carry out any powers outlined within the legislation and delegation for formal proceedings to be undertaken where required. 1.3. The changes detailed in 1.1 above does not mean that officers currently carrying out public protection functions are unauthorised, but it is nevertheless prudent to protect the authority from any possible legal challenge. It is therefore proposed that the legislation outlined in Annexes 1 and 2 be adopted, re-adopted, and a scheme of delegation set for authorisation of officers and initiation of formal proceedings. The recommendations 2.1, the adoption, re-adoption of legislation listed in Annex 1 and 2 that are not to be the responsibility of the Executive in accordance with the Local Authorities Regulations 2007 be approved. 2.2, the delegation to the Head of Public Protection of the function of doing any act which the Council has a power or duty to do, including the power to serve any notice and to authorise officers or other suitably qualified persons that it is necessary for the enforcement of any of the provisions contained in the enactments set out in Annex 1 and are not to be the responsibility of the Executive in accordance with the Local Authorities Regulations 2007, and any orders or regulations or other instruments, any modification or reenactment, and to authorise and institute legal proceedings in consultation with the Head of Legal and Democratic Services arising from any breach of those provisions be approved. 2.3, the delegation to the Head of Public Protection and Environmental Health Manager of the function of doing any act which the Council has a power or duty to do, including the power to serve any notice and to authorise officers or other suitably qualified persons, that is necessary for the enforcement of any of the provisions contained in the enactments set out in Annex 2 that are not to be the responsibility of the Executive in accordance with the Local Authorities Regulations 2007, and any orders or regulations or other instruments, any modification or reenactment, and to authorise and institute legal proceedings in consultation with the Head of Legal and Democratic Services arising from any breach of those provisions be approved. I so move, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Simmons. Do we have a seconder for this agenda item? Councillor David Hughes.
I'll second it, but I'm sure the council will be glad it wasn't me bring this report. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hughes. Do you have any questions? Councillor Louise Mynett-Vokes.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's just a query really. In the list of primary legislation, obviously I can see that the National Assistance Act is still listed. Why is that? Please.
The list of legislation, primary and then secondary, the regulations, was given to us by the Shared Regulatory Service in Cardiff, which runs the Vale as well. That was listed in that list. Are you saying it's no longer an act that's in force?
So the current act is in place of the National Assistance Act is the Social Service and Wellbeing Act 2014, and that goes hand in hand with the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, where they both define well-being as protection from harm, abuse and neglect. And then equally you've got the Equalities Act, where it states in section 149 where the council must, in exercise of its functions, have due regard to eliminate discrimination, harassment and victimisation. So I'm not sure whether those need to be included in relation to public protection.
What I would say there is the list of legislation has been given to us as a up-to-date set of legislation that they require to run that service.
Okay.
If you're saying that there's additional ones that need to be added to it, then we can do that. And perhaps we can have this discussion following this meeting.
Mr Mayor, if there's additional legislation needs to be added, should we be voting on this evening?
I think there's no reason why you can't vote on it this evening, because what you have to do, what I would be asking you to do, is to make progress, because until we make progress and adopt this, you are at risk of your officers being unable to pursue enforcement action for the legislation we've got there. What we can do is always add, because there is provision for me in consultation to update the elements of the Constitution that require updating when there's just a change in legislation.
Okay.
So we can do that, and then we can just let you know when we've had to do that. I think what we're going to find is that some of that legislation which is specific to Wales may not be the relevant legislation in the context of some of the activities that these various departments follow.
Right.
But we'll need to research that and make sure that that's correct. And if it does need to be added in, we can add it in, and then we can just let members know that it's been added in and updated.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Vokes. Councillor Clive Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There's pages and pages of these acts. On a page 120, it refers to Mid Glamorgan County Council Act 1987. I'm sure there's a very good reason why that's in there, but Mid Glamorgan County Council went out of existence on the 1st of April 1996. Is it because certain parts of that act would cover the successor authorities?
Yes, it's that. There are pieces of legislation which continue to enforce obligations on local authorities in certain regulatory capacities. So whilst I'm not going to tell you that I know which part of that piece of legislation does do that, the fact that it's in there, and as Simon's already explained, the way how that's come about, that will mean that there will be something in there which is still in force. So yes, there is an enormous list of legislation. What we need to ensure is that all of the relevant legislation is covered, even if some of it becomes obsolete as time goes on.
Councillor Jones. Councillor Anna Williams-Price.
Thank you. Councillor Simmons, how did you identify that this scheme of delegation was required now? And how will you ensure you have full oversight of public protection functions and the use of these delegated powers in future?
If I can just step in there, part of the reason why this comes before you now is because as officers we have been considering the issues that arise from the Constitution and the things that needed to be updated as part of the Constitution, and then considering again which elements can't wait now for the further training and involvement that needs to take place before you're prepared to consider the full Constitution again. So in the intervening period, it's a matter for officers to keep members advised as to any areas where we say, in order to practice properly, and particularly in this area where there's lots of enforcement action that needs to take place, where we feel that these things need to happen. So it's for officers to keep members informed on that basis. Does that, I can't see you, I'm sorry. Does that answer your question? To go.
Thank you. Yes, that answers the first part of the question. Could I ask for clarity from Councillor Simmons on the second part of the question, which is how she will ensure as Cabinet Member that she continues to have full oversight of the use of these powers?
Yes, I can assure you that regular meetings are held with the relevant officers, and you would have already had some communications from me with changes that comes from officers and emails sent out, but obviously I will keep you abreast with any changes that comes from this.
Thank you. And just to follow on from that, in the 1.3 of the summary report, it notes that the scheme of delegation is obviously intended to protect the authority for possible legal challenge. Has there been a legal challenge previously against the local authority? And if yes, could you provide further details on the authority's response to any challenge?
Can I ask Simon Jones to take that for me, please?
There has been none so far, but it doesn't mean that in the future that won't be forthcoming, because very often people who challenge prosecutions brought by the council won't necessarily look to see whether or not the evidence you're presenting is believed, etc. They will start at the outset to say, did the officer who came into my premises have the statutory authority and the delegated authority to do that? So that's essentially where we're at with it.
Thank you, Councillor Price. Councillor David Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Gladys mentioned other possibly missed legislation being added to this list. Will we be updated if any information is added, if other legislation is added?
Yes.
Thank you.
Answer.
I see you then.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Any other members with questions? Okay, nobody's indicating. Any members with comments? Nobody's indicating. Oh, Councillor David Jones.
Sorry, legacies, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Okay. Nobody's indicating. Can we take this to the vote then, please?
Can I ask Councillor Kevin Gibbs, please, are you voting for, against or abstaining?
For.
Thank you. And Councillor Darren Roberts, can I ask, are you voting for, against or abstaining?
For.
Thank you. And that's carried, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Monitoring Officer. Agenda item number 8, Dear Not Shamai, to consider the report of the Chief Officer for Education. The Cabinet Member for Education, Councillor Michelle Jones, will be presenting and moving this report.
I can't make my microphone turn off now, so I don't.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Monitoring Officer. So just the summary of the report. The report outlines the development of the Dairad Shwmae celebration event across the county borough since 2019. The event has developed to include Welsh language businesses and is supported by local schools as well as Welsh language partners. Partners and the wider public have identified the need to develop a wider event to support the use of Welsh language across the county borough. This event would need planning and consideration over grant funding to allow it to take place, which could be secured by working in partnership with other agencies. Therefore, we recommend the setting up of a steering group to develop a wider Welsh language event to coincide with Dairad Shwmae and secure external funding be approved. I so move, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Do we have a seconder for this agenda item?
Very happy to second that report, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Simmons. Do we have any questions from members? Councillor Scott Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I just want to say, obviously, on the basis of last year's event, it was successful. However, there were complaints raised by stall holders during the event that obviously where they were weren't signposted clearly, or they were just sort of left out of the loop, as some were left indoors while the rest were outside, and found that the footfall wasn't working in their favour. So I just want to ensure that obviously whoever is taking charge of this, can they make sure that either A, it's all signposted, or B, everybody gets equal representation so they all get an equal share. That's pretty much my only question.
It was noted last year, Councillor Thomas, and it's certainly, the event for this year will be different.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. Councillor Clive Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Two questions. One is, have officers any idea how much this group will be likely to apply for? Unless I missed it, I didn't see any figures, likely figures in the report. So it can be a minimal amount or it could be a large amount. Have we any idea what they require?
It'll depend what this is why we want to set up the steering group, Councillor Jones, to actually look at what this event is going to look like. It's grown, as you can see from the report, it's grown from the initial event when just two schools came in to actually the large event, which is why we ended up in the castle actually inside, because we didn't have enough space. So it's grown to that. The reason it's being done by one officer at the moment. So we need the steering group to actually say, what is this going to look like and how can we actually expand? Partners have got access to different sources of funding than we have. So we would look to grow it this year through our own external funding that we've secured. We've secured grant funding again this year, but then work with the partners. Do we want a similar event? Do we want to take it into the evening? It becomes a partnership event rather than a local authority driven event. So we can't answer that. It will be a considerable amount of money, looking at the large lottery funds or the other Welsh language grants that we can actually secure. We've got a Welsh language conference coming up in June, where if this is approved, would actually be discussed. How can we actually look at this, and how will we look at this moving forward? The Tavoil event, which we sort of mirroring from Cardiff, has had considerable funding, but that is a 2-3 day event. So we're looking at about 150,000 plus probably for the size of the event that we want to do, which won't be this year. We'd be looking at it sort of 2025.
Thank you, Sue. And my second question is on page 135, under paragraph 4, proposals for further events, 4.2. I'll read the first bit of it. As members are aware, due to the space required, Merthyr Tydfil is unable to host the Urdd Eisteddfod. I was under the impression that we had identified, or the Urdd had identified, that Merthyr Tydfil was a suitable venue, but does anybody know what the reasons were why this is now not considered as a suitable venue?
It was the space. When the Urdd came to us and said, we looked at the space, and when we looked at the space that the local authority owns, there isn't enough space. I don't know if Judith can explain a little bit more of the capacity that we needed. There wasn't the space. It's grown. A number of members will remember when it was held. It's a significantly larger event than it was then, and we simply haven't got the space to be able to host as a local authority.
When we're talking about space, Mr. Mayor, we're not just surely talking about Carmarthen Park and the castle. There are other spaces throughout the county borough which could be added to it. And you're quite right. I distinctly remember the 1987 event, which was extremely successful.
Do you want to come in?
Yeah, as Sue said, a number of officers looked at this. We did an exercise looking at land across the county borough, but the requirement from the Urdd were quite specific for camping sites as well as the main mice itself to hold the events. There was, bus parking, all of those kind of things. So there was a number of sites required of a certain size, and we couldn't accommodate them within the county borough.
Great pity, really.
When we took this back, however, to the Welsh and Education Forum group, and I think Councillor Simmons was at that event, the the Urdd would actually restrict what we were able to do as part of the celebration. So a number of members of the Welsh and Education Forum felt that actually hosting our own gave us more ownership of it. Wouldn't have hasn't got the sort of Urdd badge, but it would give us ownership to be able to develop and to really Merthyr Tydfilise the celebration that we want.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Councillor Geraint-Thomas.
It's not a question, Mr. Mayor, but it was going to part answer what Councillor Jones asked. I think it was the date that the Urdd asked us for as well. I think it was going to be in the next few years that they wanted the Eisteddfod to be held in Merthyr Tydfil, but it was unfortunate. But the work's going on at the moment with the castle, with the foundation, the Welsh Water, etc. Didn't lend itself, and we had limitations at this time. But I think there's something we review in the future when all that's completed and the event space at the furnaces site is available as well. So I think it's a few years away before we can hold an Urdd or even a national Eisteddfod, I hope, in time.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. Any other questions from members? Nobody's indicating. Any comments from members? Councillor Michelle Simmons.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As current Welsh language champion, I would like to thank Angharad Jones for her commitment to developing and organising Diwrnod Shwmae Shwmae over the past years. This event is becoming an integral date for our calendars, and the support and collaboration we have from our schools, Welsh language partners and businesses for this event in promoting the use of our Welsh language is and has been extremely positive. So diolch yn fawr, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Simmons. Councillor Scott Thomas.
Diolch, and thank you very much, Mr Mayor. I just wanted to sort of express that I did invite Dwynwen, the Welsh language Siamairam Dragon, to the event to obviously oversee this tonight, and she unfortunately is busy. But she has sent her thanks to everybody for supporting, who should they do it to support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. Councillor Geraint Thomas.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and just support Councillor Thomas and Councillor Simmons. You know, I've seen this event grow now the last few years, and Hannah Harrod has done a fantastic job. She really has. It's almost single-handedly, you know, with the help of Sue as well, to bring this together, you know, and the way it's expanding, who knows where it's going to finally end up. And I think it just won't be 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, could be a week. We could have a very amounts of events throughout the year. So it's just great for our culture, our tourism, our heritage, that we support this and really take it forward into the future for our children and their well-being going forward, and hopefully grow the Welsh language in the borough, because that is our aim. So yeah, I hope everybody gets behind this tonight and fully endorses recommendations. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. Any other comments from members? Okay, nobody's indicating. Can we take this to the vote then, please?
Councillor Kevin Gibbs, are you voting for, against or abstaining?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Darren Roberts, are you voting for, against or abstaining?
For.
Thank you, and that's carried, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Monitoring Officer. Agenda item number 9, implementing the Schools and Employers Aspiring Learners Pledge. To consider the report of the Chief Officer for Education. The Cabinet Member for Education, Councillor Michelle Jones, will be presenting and moving this report.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So in summary, this report provides members with information regarding the Business Education Together Partnership and the Schools Employers Aspiring Learners Pledge. So straight to the recommendation that the proposal to accept the recommendation that the sign-up of Merthyr Tydfil Borough Council as an active participant in the seal be approved. I so move, Mr Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Do we have a seconder for this agenda item?
Yeah, happy to second that, Mr Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mitten. Any questions for members? Nobody's indicating. Any comments for members? Councillor Lisa Mitten.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Well, happy to second it, of course, and inevitably welcome this report. I think it's important to note that this week is National Apprenticeship Week as well. And fundamentally, what this steering group will do is engage with the schools, employers and other partners as well, to not only talk about, you know, career routes, academic routes, etc., but also that vocational offer as well, which is so important. And you'll see that with RSPs, regional skills partnerships, etc., who've recently launched their strategic plans, it talks about that engagement with schools and Career Wales, etc., to really talk to young people about the routes available when they decide to leave school. And our vocational offer is out there, and especially for, you know, those who feel more comfortable in that world of work, but also for those who are more academically minded and, you know, are more able and talented students as well, can be encouraged to undertake an apprenticeship. You know, there are fantastic opportunities out there. So I really welcome this, you know, and look forward to seeing those members who are on board, and the invitation to other stakeholders as well who can share that experience and helping our teaching workforce, who are so influential to young people, to gain a greater understanding of those other offers out there. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Mitten. Any other members with comments? Okay, nobody's indicating. Can we take this to the vote then, please?
Councillor Kevin Gibbs, could you tell us if you're voting for, against or abstaining, please?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Darren Roberts, can you tell us if you're voting for, against or abstaining, please?
For.
Thank you. and that's carried, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Monitoring Officer. Agenda item number 10, to deal with any urgent business or correspondence. I've got 3 items. On behalf of elected members and with Tibble County Borough Council, I would like to extend our sincerest condolences to Councillor David Hughes and his family on the passing of his mother yesterday. I'd also like to pass on our deepest sympathies to Councillor Claire Jones and family, whose husband's funeral was this afternoon. The other item, the news of the earthquake in Turkey and Syria, which has led to the death of over 11,000 people so far, has shocked the whole world. And on behalf of members of Mid Tibble County Borough Council, I would like to pass on our heartfelt sympathies to all of those affected. Agenda item number 11, to receive communications from their worship the Mayor. I have none. So thank you very much for your attendance tonight, and I formally declare this meeting finished.